Than Shwe was born on February 2, 1933, in Kyaukse, a small town in the Mandalay region of central Burma, which is now called Myanmar. He was born into a modest background, far removed from the wealth and privilege that would later surround his name. His father worked as a postal clerk, and the family lived in simple conditions, with little indication that the young boy would one day command one of the most brutal military regimes in Asia. Than Shwe grew up during a turbulent period in Burmese history, as the nation was caught between British colonial control, the Japanese occupation during World War II, and the struggles of Burmese nationalists who sought independence. This chaotic environment shaped his early years, instilling in him both an awareness of instability and a desire for rigid control. As a young man, Than Shwe was not particularly distinguished in academics. He did, however, show an interest in discipline and structure. He trained briefly as a postal clerk, following in his father's profession, but he soon sought greater opportunities. The turning point came in 1953, when he joined the Burmese army. The army at the time was seen as a path for young men to achieve social mobility, prestige, and power, especially since the nation was still forming its identity after independence from Britain in 1948. Than Shwe was admitted to the officers' training school in Batu, where he underwent military training that would lay the foundation for his lifelong career in the armed forces. His early military career was unremarkable, but he advanced steadily through the ranks. In the 1960s, Than Shwe was assigned to the Burmese Psychological Warfare Department. This role was significant because it gave him experience in propaganda, mass persuasion, and the control of public narratives. Unlike many officers who gained prominence through combat, Than Shwe's rise was tied to his ability to manipulate information and manage the perception of the military among the people. He earned a reputation as a loyal officer, quiet, and disciplined, though not charismatic. His lack of public flamboyance often made him appear invisible compared to other more outspoken officers. However, this quality later allowed him to maneuver in the shadows of power without drawing much attention. Than Shwe continued his climb within the military hierarchy as the army strengthened its hold on the country. General Ne Win, who had staged a coup in 1962, ruled Burma with a firm hand, enforcing a one-party system and socialist policies that isolated the country from the world. During this period, Than Shwe became known as a man who avoided dissent and never openly questioned his superiors. His obedience and reliability helped him secure promotions. By the 1970s, he had risen to the rank of colonel and served as a regional commander. In these roles, he demonstrated a harsh approach toward dissent and rebellion, particularly in areas where ethnic insurgencies challenged the authority of the central government. His loyalty to the Army's mission of preserving unity at any cost became a defining feature of his leadership style. The 1980s marked Than Shwe's transition into the upper echelons of power. He was promoted to brigadier general and became a member of the War Office, which allowed him to influence military strategy on a national level. During this time, Burma was experiencing economic decline, growing dissatisfaction among its citizens, and rising opposition movements. In 1988, massive pro-democracy protests, known as the 8,888 uprising, shook the country. The protests were brutally suppressed by the military, resulting in thousands of deaths. This event solidified the Army's determination to maintain absolute power and silence all challenges to its rule. Than Shwe was a participant in the decisions that followed, and he proved himself as someone willing to endure severe repression for the sake of stability. In 1990, Burma held general elections under international pressure. The National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won by a landslide. However, the military refused to recognize the results. Instead, it retained full power, demonstrating its unwillingness to hand over control. By this time, Than Shwe had emerged as a central figure within the ruling junta, known as the State Law and Order Restoration Council, or SLORC. In 1992, the head of the junta, General Samong, stepped down under questionable circumstances, likely due to internal pressures and disagreements within the military. Than Shwe, then a senior general, was selected to replace him as the chairman of the council, effectively becoming the head of state and the supreme leader of Burma. Than Shwe's rise to power was not dramatic, but rather the result of calculated patience and an image of reliability. He was not viewed as brilliant, but his caution and ability to avoid controversy allowed him to outlast rivals. When he assumed leadership in 1992, Burma was isolated from the world, its economy was struggling, and its people were restless. Than Shwe began his rule with a combination of limited reforms and unyielding control. On one hand, he released some political prisoners and reopened Burma to modest foreign investment. On the other hand, he maintained the army's dominance, silenced critics, and ensured that all authority remained under his command. From the very beginning of his rule, Than Shwe relied on fear, loyalty, and manipulation. He reshaped the ruling council, renaming it the State Peace and Development Council in 1997, to present a softer image to the outside world. Behind the name change, however, the methods of rule remained the same, if not harsher. He built a cult of personality around himself, emphasizing traditional Burmese values and Buddhism, while presenting himself as a guardian of the nation. Unlike some dictators who openly embraced modernity, Than Shwe cloaked his regime in tradition and nationalism, which appealed to many ordinary citizens but also ensured that opposition movements were portrayed as threats to cultural identity. By the late 1990s, Than Shwe had consolidated his authority as one of the most powerful men in Southeast Asia. His rise from a postal clerk's son in Kayokse to the Supreme General of Burma was complete, and his rule would shape the country for decades. He had entered power quietly, but the impact of his leadership would be felt with brutal intensity. His ability to stay in command was rooted not in charisma, but in fear, discipline, and an iron grip on the army and the people. When Than Shwe assumed leadership of Myanmar in 1992, he inherited a country already under tight military control. Yet he took the authoritarian system to new extremes. While his predecessor General Samong had been somewhat conciliatory, promising elections and political reforms, Than Shwe abandoned even those minimal gestures. He consolidated power by turning the State Law and Order Restoration Council into an even more repressive machine. He ruled as the head of the military junta, reshaping it in his image, and used fear, propaganda, and brute force to ensure his dominance. Than Shwe kept Aung San Suu Kyi, the popular opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, under strict house arrest for much of his rule. The National League for Democracy had won the 1990 elections decisively, but the results were never recognized by the junta. Than Shwe not only denied her freedom but also sought to weaken her influence by suppressing her party, banning political gatherings, and arresting activists who dared to challenge his authority. These actions drew widespread condemnation from the international community, yet inside Myanmar, few could resist his regime without facing harsh consequences. The hallmark of Than Shwe rule was a blend of paranoia and cruelty. He distrusted even his closest allies within the army and frequently reshuffled military leadership to prevent any potential rivals from becoming too powerful. Reports from insiders suggested that he surrounded himself with astrologers and fortune-tellers, relying on their guidance for political decisions. His obsession with astrology even influenced major state policies, such as relocating the capital from Yangon to Naypyidaw in 2005. The sudden move baffled many, but it was explained as a way to fortify the regime against potential foreign invasions and internal uprisings. In reality, it symbolized the secretive and eccentric nature of his rule. Economically, Than Shwe presided over a country with immense natural wealth but deep poverty. Myanmar had valuable resources such as jade, timber, and natural gas, yet the wealth was funneled into the hands of military elites and their associates. Ordinary citizens lived under crushing poverty, with weak infrastructure, limited healthcare, and poor education systems. Corruption was rampant, and the black market thrived under military patronage. Instead of investing in development, the regime enriched itself through shady business deals and smuggling networks. The brutality of Than Shwe rule was most visible in the way his regime handled dissent. In 2007, Buddhist monks led mass demonstrations known as the Saffron Revolution. Thousands of monks and civilians filled the streets to protest economic hardship and repression. The protests were peaceful, but Than Shwe responded with violence. Troops opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, killing dozens and arresting many more. Monasteries were raided, monks were beaten, and some disappeared altogether. This event drew international outrage and placed Than Shwe firmly in the category of brutal dictators who crushed his own people to remain in power. Natural disasters also exposed the cruelty of his regime. When Cyclone Nargis struck Myanmar in 2008, killing more than 130,000 people, the government response was widely criticized as inhumane. Than Shwe initially refused to allow international aid workers into the country, fearing foreign influence. Even when aid was finally accepted, the distribution was chaotic and corrupt, with much of the relief being diverted to military-controlled warehouses or sold in markets. Thousands died needlessly because the regime prioritized its own security over the suffering of its people. Despite his harsh methods, Than Shwe managed to survive as the head of the regime for nearly 2 decades. International sanctions isolated Myanmar, yet his government maintained close ties with China and some regional neighbors, which provided enough economic lifelines to sustain the junta. While the West viewed him as a tyrant, inside the country he cultivated an image of a strongman protecting Myanmar from foreign domination. State-controlled media praised him as a father figure of the nation, though many saw him as a source of oppression and hardship. Than Shwe eventually oversaw a carefully staged transition of power. By 2011, he stepped down, handing control to a civilian-looking government that was still dominated by the military. His chosen successor, Thein Sein, introduced limited reforms, such as loosening censorship and allowing Aung San Suu Kyi to run for office. Yet Than Shwe continued to wield influence from behind the scenes. He avoided prosecution for his actions, living quietly in Naypyidaw, shielded by the system he had built. His legacy is deeply contested. On one hand, he kept the military firmly in power and insulated Myanmar from Western influence for decades. On the other, his policies left the nation impoverished, repressed, and isolated. Many of the scars of his rule remain visible today: weakened institutions, unresolved ethnic conflicts, and a society accustomed to fear. His decision to crush dissent with violence, his reliance on superstition for governance, and his neglect of ordinary citizens during crises mark him as one of the most ruthless dictators in modern Southeast Asian history. Than Shwe is still alive, a rare case among dictators who usually fall to violent overthrows or revolutions. Now in retirement, he lives in seclusion, avoiding public appearances. Yet for the people of Myanmar, his shadow lingers. Many blame him for setting the stage for the ongoing struggles between democracy and military rule. To his supporters, he is remembered as a leader who defended Myanmar's sovereignty. To his critics, he remains a tyrant who valued power above human life. In the final measure, The life of Than Shwe represents the story of a soldier who rose from obscurity to dominate a nation, ruling through fear, repression, and superstition. His era may have ended, but the consequences of his dictatorship still shape Myanmar. His name stands as a reminder of how one man's obsession with control can hold back an entire country for generations.